Hi, everybody. Hi there. Glad to see that. I guess I can be heard. I don't see myself on my Apple or iPad, but I can see that Andrea responded. So, hi, everybody. Waiting for a couple of minutes until more of you come online. Oh, there are lots of people online. Okay, fantastic. I can see a lot of you. Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and happy Saturday for those of you for whom this is still a Saturday and not Sunday. Um, awesome. So let me start and welcome to new members who haven't seen a Facebook Live before, and you're going to see this in the future many, many, many times, I'm sure, or at least I hope. Um, and I had a lot of questions that I received over the many days that we had when I announced um, this live event. And I'm hoping that it's going to be recorded as always. And then it's going to be posted under files under live events in the guide. So you can always refer back to it. And I think I'm going to go over in time a little bit. It's going to be more than an hour because I just have received so many great questions and I want to address as many as I can. And so I can see your comments. So if you have comments that you're asking all the way through, I can see them. But I just have to sort of kind of look over there and scroll away. So let me start. And I sort of kind of rearranged the questions that I have received over the past week in the order that I thought it was kind of most important to first start with, and then as we go toward the end, the complexity of the questions are going to be less, so it's easier to, and faster to answer. So let me start by a question that was posted by Eva from Sweden, and she was asking the following. Why is type 2 diabetes supposed to reduce both carbs and also fat? So why on type 2 diabetes, I should say. And so it is a very good question because what do we have to do with carbs and also fat? And why, for example, we emphasize protein and then next we emphasize fat, but it's a lesser amount of fat than it is in carbs. And so it's an excellent question. So we have several reasons why we do that. So first of all, let me explain that both fat and carbs, and also from the protein, we get some carbs, right? Because some of the amino acids, actually 80% of them, are glucogenic. And so even if we did protein synthesis, if whatever protein excess that we ate, that is going to convert to glucose, is going to become fuel. And if it didn't meet our leucine threshold, as you recall, leucine being an amino acid that starts protein synthesis, and we need a minimum 3 gram per meal to meet that. If it don't meet protein synthesis, then the protein, again, 80% of the protein is going to convert to glucose and it's just going to burn as fuel. And so we can basically see that we have two main fuels, and those are glucose and fat. There are additional fuels. For example, ketone is a fuel. It's a kind of a fat, and also alcohol is a fuel that gives 7 kilocalories per gram. So we have more than just these two fuels, but let's just think of these two. You can't burn both at the same time. So there's a mechanism within our body which automatically shuts off the burning of glucose when we have fat, or the burning of fat when we have glucose. So it matters which one we have most of and which one we're focusing on. And when you have both of them, the body is going to choose to burn glucose first not because it prefers glucose. There's no such as preferring glucose. Glucose is not our preferred fuel. There's some organs that can only use glucose, and some organs that can use only fat, and some organs that preferably, if given, only ketones. So we have different kind of organs, and each use different kind of energy. But those organs that can use glucose, in addition to that, they would prefer to use something else. When we eat carbohydrates, and if the glucose level in our blood exceeds the normal threshold level, which is 99 milligram per deciliter in imperial and 5.5 millimole per liter in the metric system, when we exceed that, then that means our blood glucose is too much fuel in the blood. And the problem with blood glucose being in the blood is that it has some negative uh, capacity. And we know that it can destroy and damage the glycocalyx, which is a glucose kind of a little furry hair system that makes our vascular system internally very slippery and allow the blood to flow only in one direction. It can't flow backwards, for example. And so, but glucose, if it's too high in the blood, it destroys this, and it opens up the endothelial layer in the vascular system, which is a very thin one cell layer that protects the vascular wall from food or blood or any other elements going through it. But if they have too much glucose in the blood and the glycocalyx, this protection is destroyed, then things can get inside the blood vessels, and that is how we end up getting plaques, for example. And so it is very important to reduce the glucose to the right amount. Fat, on the other hand, we have two kinds of fats within our body. We have the fat that we eat, and then we have the fat that we store. And they work in a different way. If somebody is a little bit overweight, or quite a bit overweight and wants to lose weight, then eating fat together with carbs is counterproductive because glucose will have to be burned first, and the fat is going to therefore be stored, and then it's going to be burned later. So your fat deposit is going to grow. If you don't eat carbohydrates, you just eat fat, you're fine because you're only eating one fuel. So we have people, and I will talk about it later, who only eat fat or eat a lot of fat. And there are some advantages and some disadvantages as well. But if you eat only fat, you only have fat as your fuel. And so it's not going to deposit. You're burning that fat that you ate. And then after you burn that fuel that you ate, then you're going to use more fat, which is something that your body has stored. And then you don't have any problem. But if you eat the two combined, fats and carbs, and look at in nature, find a food other than milk, that's the only dairy, the natural food, where fats and carbohydrates are together. Try to find another food in which both fats and carbohydrates are in large amount. There's going to be a little bit of fat in a highly carbohydrate food, like say, choose an apple. It will have minimal, almost zero fat in it. It's going to have a lot of carbs. And you can have something, for example, corn. It will have a little bit more fat, but it's still like minimal. It's very, very tiny relative to the amount of carbs in it. But if you then pick, for example, a high-fat meat, you can choose, say, ribeye, and with the high fat, it will have very little carbs in it. There will be some carbs because muscle cells contain glycogen, which is the stored starch form of glucose by all mammalian bodies. And so there will be some carbs in it, but there won't be that much. It's not going to be anything significant, but there will be a lot of fat in it. And so in nature, you don't find fat and carbs at the same time, and that's why it's a problem for the body then to use both. But in our modern lives, in our modern food system, we sort of kind of created both. And this is why we have a very unhealthy population. And so when I tell you to not have fat as well as carbs, it really isn't specific to type 2 diabetes. It's specific in general. You shouldn't be eating both fats and carbs at the same time because that can cause some management problem with respect to your fuel. In terms of migraine, it can cause a problem because you're storing these, one of the two you're going to be storing and the other you're going to be using. And depending upon which one, you may end up disturbing your electrolytes. And so if you're eating just a little bit of carbohydrates and a lot of fat, it's not going to happen. Your carbohydrate, as little as it is, it will burn really quickly, and then you switch to fat. But if you work the other way around, and you have a lot of carbohydrate and a little fat, then a lot of carbohydrates will burn, and the fat is going to be put to rest, and that's likely going to cause a migraine. So it's not type 2 diabetic specific, but there is a problem in type 2 diabetes. And I wanted to say that this is my point number 2 in response, is that not all fats are the same. And so if you're eating saturated fatty acids, saturated fat, that has a very different property to our body than if you eat polyunsaturated fats. Monounsaturated is kind of sort of neutral in this respect. Our bodies can make both mono and saturated fats. They're so essential for us that we make it even if you don't eat it. Polyunsaturated fats only, we don't make them, we have to eat them. And polyunsaturated fat, which we also call PUFA, have something that is just recently coming up in light of what these fats are. It has a negative association with how it behaves in terms of fat cells. So we all have fat cells in our bodies, and the fat cells, of course, want to have fat deposited in them. That is their job. They just simply collect fat. If you have a lot of PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, these are vegetable fats. So think of any vegetable fat other than coconut is going to be mostly polyunsaturated fat. In animals, you don't find too much polyunsaturated fat in any animal. But in fish, for example, all omega-3 is polyunsaturated fatty acids. So we have to be careful even with the amount of omega-3 fatty acids we eat. And we had some discussion about this in the group of late. But PUFA, because it's not natural to the mammalian body to eat PUFA, it just isn't. And we have created this whole world full of PUFA they create oil now from corn, from cottonseed. No, these are not foods, right? So we're creating oil from stuff that aren't oily to start with. And we concentrate and we heat and then we deodorize so you don't smell that it's rancid. And so it's not a natural fat to humans per se. And when we eat them, their properties differ from those fats that we normally eat. So our fat cells have insulin receptors on them. And the reason why we have insulin receptors on the fat cells is because whatever excess glucose or fat you eat is going to be transported into the fat cells. And insulin is an anabolic hormone, and so everything that is depositing in your body must use insulin, right? And so insulin will deliver the glucose and the fat into your fat cells. And the polyunsaturated fatty acids make fat cells very insulin sensitive. And at the same time, of course, a type 2 diabetic person is insulin insensitive. That's why you have insulin resistance, which basically means that the cells in general, not fat cells, but the other cells, pull in their insulin receptors. They reduce their insulin receptors because they put out the sign, we don't want more glucose. Don't bring us glucose. But the fat cells say, we do want more glucose. Bring us more glucose. Bring us more fat. And so what happens is that the polyunsaturated fatty acids increase the capacity of the fat cells to get more fat and more glucose into them. And so this change of the fat, how the fat cells behave, creates a problem, because rather than, as for a person who is, for example, healthy obese or healthy fat, there are some people like that who are very obese, but they're completely metabolically healthy because they have smaller fat cells and they have the genetic ability to build and create new fat cells. And so rather than having each fat cell become extremely big, they just add more new fat cells, and the fat cells are then going to become, here's my microphone, I forgot to put it here, and the fat cells then are going to become not so full, but there will be more of them. And so this is a healthier way of having fat than for those people who genetically are predisposed such that they, rather than having more fat cells, they just have one big one. And so there are some differences between certain ethnicities as well. So, for example, Asian people are extremely tiny and very thin, and so they are very typically they have the kind of fat cells that very few fat cells that will become large and engrossed, and as a result, that is going to literally create type 2 diabetes, even if otherwise they aren't eating carbohydrates in excess. And so the kind of fat cells that you have seriously matter whether you will become type 2 diabetic or not. A lucky person who may weigh maybe 500 pounds but has the kind of fat cells that many little ones and can build new fat cells, it's not going to affect the metabolic system at all because every single fat cell is still small and is healthy. Whereas if you're looking at a person who just has fewer fat cells that become very large, then those fat cells literally start rotting. And so there are going to be a lot of macrophages and a whole lot of other kind of things inside the fat cell as well that are trying to sort of kind of repair the cell while it is getting bigger and bigger and unhealthier. And so the kind of fats that you eat matters because the only fat that is going to enhance the absorption of fat into a fat cell by increasing, expressing more of the insulin receptors is going to be the polyunsaturated fatty acids. So you need to be careful with PUFAs very specifically when you eat them. So it's not for all fats when we're talking about that you need to reduce fat. The only reason why you need to reduce fat together with carbohydrates is, as mentioned earlier, is that then you have two fuels. But so you can see that there are two sides to this story, and some very specific to people who have type 2 diabetes and others who don't. But even if you don't have the good type of fat cells, meaning that you have a big one instead of many little ones, you in time may still end up type 2 diabetic depending upon how you eat the fat that you're eating and how you eat the carbs that you're eating. If you're eating them together all the time, then you still may end up diabetic at the end. So there are certain qualities to the foods that we're eating that are at a very molecular level that some of which is still not even understood. But so eating a very high fat diet. So let me talk a little bit about that. There are some people in the group who have seizures or have children who have seizures. And of course, we have heard of the Charlie Foundation. And I'm also working with Keto Mojo. They have a representative now who's working with seizure and epileptic children. And so we do know that the high-fat diet is very good for them. And those people who have seizures or epilepsy don't eat carbohydrates and eat a much reduced protein as well, because basically their brain only functions properly if they eat a lot of fat. And I'm not sure if you understand why fully what that is, and I haven't looked into it because it's not my field too much. But there are some diets where even protein is reduced. So not just carbs, but also proteins. Protein is reduced. A child who has epileptic seizures regularly several times a day usually eats about 95% of the 90 to 95% of the calories in fat, and the remaining 5% or so is from protein. And if they eat any carbohydrates, it's really maybe a leaf of lettuce. I mean, we are talking about really unhealthy eating because this also then degenerates the muscles, the skeletal muscles and other muscles. So it cannot be for a very long term, but it's sort of kind of trade-off between having a seizure or not having it. The next question came from Helen. Actually, she had many questions, and so this is one of them. Helen Street. So she asked, could you possibly give an explanation about insulin? I have a decent understanding of how it works with blood sugar, diabetes, metabolic health, weight gain, etc. But I'm not sure why we need to avoid or control insulin release as it relates to migraines. Does insulin directly affect or cause migraines, or is the effect coming from the blood sugar imbalance, metabolic illness, health? Can I explain that? Sure. So let me explain this. Insulin itself, of course, we know that what it is, but we have so many new members, maybe not everybody does. So the role of insulin in our body is manifold. Primarily, it is a growth hormone. So as a child, when you're born as a newborn, and then all through nursing and all through childhood, basically we count childhood until growth and development happens. So for males, that's about 8:34 because the brain doesn't fully close and develop. There's one part of the brain that develops very late. For males, it's 34, and for females, I believe it's 32. So that's the time when a person is fully mature. Until that point, insulin works mostly as a growth hormone. It doesn't have the job of taking glucose out of the blood. What it does is that it takes everything the kid eats and takes it out of the blood and puts it toward growth. And that growth is going to be height as well of new cells and the organs. Is going to be, of course, getting fat. It's going to be everything. It's a growth hormone. And insulin is made from, as we know, cholesterol actually, or just about everything is made from cholesterol and protein. And so all the hormones are made from cholesterol and protein. And so as a primary growth hormone, when we become an adult, if we were still ancestral humans, we would see our insulin sort of kind of dropping the insulin amount. The fasting insulin is what I'm talking about. It's supposed to be dropping, not to zero, but to a very, very low level because we no longer grow, right? The problem is that we sort of kind of changed this around with our diet, with our modern lifestyle. And so now we're fighting the very thing that is essential for us to grow. We're trying to tell it as adults to not grow, right? So it's a problem. So it isn't just a problem of migraine, it's a problem of everything else. And so every time you eat, whatever food you eat, insulin is going to get involved. So for example, if you eat protein, you eat meat or fish or foods with protein, if you eat enough, meaning the 3-gram leucine threshold to start protein synthesis, and protein synthesis isn't just skeletal muscles. Also, all your cells, your blood cell is made of protein. All your skin cells are made of protein. Your organs are made of protein. Your bones are made of protein. Everything is made of protein. So when we're talking about protein synthesis, I'm not talking about building skeletal muscles. You may be repairing your DNA in one of your cells. All of those are made from protein. And so when we start eating protein, the protein synthesis, as it starts, requires insulin to take the protein and convert it into the essential element that our body can store. So we will always be using insulin. No matter how old we are, hopefully, we will always have enough insulin and we will always eat enough protein to start the growth of our muscles and cells and DNA repair and so forth. In fact, in this regard, insulin is sort of kind of part of the essential use, so you may say, because as long as you have enough to create all these exchanges and to repair your cells, you remain more youthful, right? In addition, as we know, insulin is also required by some cells, but not all. So for example, there are a few organs in our bodies that have insulin receptors. I just went through a session explaining that fat cells have insulin receptors. There are also other cells, for example, that have insulin receptors that we use. For example, the food when we eat and when we convert to glucose, and the glucose from our intestines, where our body is metabolizing the food, must enter our blood. So, but it's a one-way entrance. In other words, from the intestines, we can get the glucose into the blood, but from the blood, we cannot get the glucose into the intestines. So this is an insulin receptor. It's a one-way insulin receptor. There are other insulin receptors. The liver, for example, the liver is the only organ that can't use ketones. And the liver, or not the only, because there's also glucose that can't. But so the liver can't use ketones. It's making all the ketones, but it can't itself use ketones. It can use fat, but it prefers to use glucose as well. And so it has also insulin receptors. There are some insulin receptors on the heart. There are very minimal insulin receptors in the brain, but only in certain parts. And it really, the brain doesn't actually use insulin receptors for glucose entrance because it uses sodium transport. So most of the body, with the exception of muscle, skeletal muscle cells, fat cells, and the liver, and like I said, the intestine in certain ways, all the rest of the organs actually use sodium transport mechanism for glucose. And so when you're looking at it this way, we really don't need insulin that much, even for glucose. But yet, here we are today, and everybody, if you look around, by everybody, I mean the general population, has very high insulin levels relative to their age. And that's because of the fact that we're eating a very carbohydrate rich diet, where the carbohydrate itself is just too much for the sodium channels to take it out. So let me explain how that works a little bit. In every cell, so imagine that this is a cell wall of any cell that we have in the body, say a skin cell. And in this cell, these are like flexible, it's made of fat, right? So we know that if you have lipoprotein, is the membrane around each cell. So if this is a cell, let's say it's a globular cell or it's just a flatter cell, whatever cell you think it is, it will be all the way inside or covered by a membrane, and the membrane is coated in fat. And there's a reason for this, and it's because the membrane itself has to retain a sort of electric potential for things to go in or come out of it. And so water can come and go from the cells as it wishes. There are little aquaporins, and so as the cell moves and breathes and works, it's going to take in water all the time. But other elements can't just come in and go because the cell, first of all, is full. It's not empty. And because the cell is not empty, anything that comes in, it's going to push something out, or it can come in if there is some space not in the cell and it needs something. Now think of it as your stomach. When your stomach is totally full, there's absolutely nothing you can eat without throwing something back up until your stomach sort of kind of empties just a little bit, and now you can take another bite because now you have more room. So it's the same thing with the cell. The cell is completely full. You can't just simply have a glucose go into the cell. And the glucose is a very big molecule, by the way, which has 6 water molecules in it. So when the glucose enters a cell, what's going to happen with that extra 6 water molecules that the glucose is taking in? It's going to have to leave. And so when the glucose enters, it's going to kick water out. We know that. And we also know that it's going to take sodium out, because where water goes, sodium also goes. But in addition to the fact that in a sodium transport channel, glucose uses the energy by the sodium that it creates, and it goes through very special pores that are basically voltage gated sodium glucose transport channels, which means that there are 2 kinds. Either the sodium comes out as the glucose goes in, so there is going to be the sodium opens the gate, and as the sodium enters a gate that open, glucose shimmies in there and runs through, or is the other way around, that both of them come in at the same time. It doesn't matter which way it works, pro or con, but it's a sodium transport channel. And so most of the body uses sodium transport channels, but if the cells are full, as I just noted earlier, there's no room for the glucose to come in. So then what happens to that glucose? It's going to stay in the blood. But if it stays in the blood, it causes damage. I just explained that earlier, right? So it's going to destroy the glycocalyx, it's going to cause inflammation, it's going to cause people to have their toes and fingers amputated. You're familiar with that. It's going to cause blindness. High glucose levels are really bad in the blood. You can only have so much because the only organ in the blood that uses glucose is the red blood cells and nothing else. And so we don't need more glucose than what they need. And so insulin is now, because of all the high carbohydrates that we're eating, is tasked with the new task of continuously removing glucose from the blood. And when that happens, it shoves glucose into cells, be it the fat cells, be it any other cells that don't actually want it. And this then must press something out of the cells, and it's going to press water and it's going to press sodium out of the cells. And that then leads to a migraine. And so when you have the glucose, you're looking at it this way, and you're looking at it the high insulin, when you're looking at it this way, you can see that it connects to both type 2 diabetes, but also connects to migraine, because having high glucose in the blood is going to cause an electrolyte imbalance. Okay? And so the last point that still goes with this is that we had a couple of people in the group, I think two or three, who did the true oral glucose tolerance test, in which you're drinking up a lot of glucose, anywhere between 50 to 75 grams of glucose solution, meaning it's a bunch of liquid with 50 or 75 grams of glucose in it, which is huge. And when you drink that, then they check your blood glucose and the insulin levels for usually a couple of hours, 3 hours. But in my case, oops, I would say in our case, I asked these members to have it as long as they can, 5 hours at least, and do it every half an hour. And so then when I received the data, I was able to graph it to see how their insulin responded to their glucose. And both of these members have nearly, the reason why I asked them to do it is because I wanted to see if they have type 1 diabetes, because their glucose, their insulin was so low, it was below the normal level that is listed on the lab test as the normal low. And so I wanted to see, do they still have insulin? And the most interesting thing that I found is that they started below normal insulin level, and then they eat or drank, in this case, all this glucose, and they had the ginormous insulin response, bigger. It went off the map. It was so much bigger. And then when they finished, they returned to below normal level again. And so what this tells me, first of all, this was a beyond diabetic insulin response in height, but not necessarily in space, meaning how fast it returned to normal. So one of these two members didn't show as bad of a diabetes as the other one did. But what I want to show with this is that we have what I call a hyperinsulin response. Migraineurs are so sensitive to glucose that they can't tolerate glucose at all. And the insulin responds immediately like crazy, that it wants to get rid of that glucose from the blood. And that then leads to massive sugar crashes and massive migraines. So we need to accept that we're different, and we can't just look at our insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes as for people who don't have migraines. We're very different. Now the next question comes from Teresa Villette Mensa. I may be pronouncing this name completely incorrectly. Her question is, I know you already have a lot of questions to cover, Angela, but if you have time, do you know if people with autism are prone to having migraines because they are so hypersensitive like migraineurs are? Do you personally know any persons who are autistic and have benefited from the protocol? Also, how do some foods like dairy, for instance, cause so much pain and inflammation in someone's body? Does it have to do with gut health, or is it autoimmune response, or what? Is it possible that this can change over time? So this is many, many, many questions, but they're excellent questions. So let me explain or give an answer to each of them. So first of all, we have several people in the group whose children are autistic. I know of two, and there may be more, but I know two very particularly. And over the past 8 years that the group have been in business, we currently have 12,000 members. And of course, the family and children and even friends and relatives, if you look at all of them, we totally right now work with about 20,000 members. And of course, I include the other group as well, which is the keto group, where there are 1,600 members at the moment. And so there are, I'm sure, autistic children and autistic people in general in this group, in the large group of people, but there aren't more than in the general population. In fact, I think there are less. And so I'm not thinking that migraine and being autistic and being differently sensitive is a connection. I don't see. Of course, the people in the Facebook migraine group are different people from other people who are also migraineurs because of the very fact that they're on Facebook and they're in the group. So I can't say if outside of the group, if I look at all migraineurs, if there are more autistic children within that population, that I wouldn't know. It's not something that is discussed, but we do know that in terms of the way that we eat, which would be protocol or carnivore, and there are some keto members, I'm sure, also watching this program. And ketogenic in particular are extremely beneficial for autistic children. In fact, there's a film which is called The Magic Pill. So if you know of children who are autistic and you're friends with the parents, I recommend that you have them see this film, The Magic Pill. And I forget if it was Amazon Prime or Netflix or what way. I think it was Amazon Prime. It's not free. You have to pay for it, but it's minimal. It's like $4 or $5. And it's a fantastic film showing precisely over time, they were watching the children, and over time, there, I believe, if I remember correctly, there was a girl and there was a boy, very particularly followed, and there were some other people as well. And both of them have completely changed when they went on the ketogenic diet, and they were able to catch up and start to develop the right way. So I am of the understanding and the belief at this point that just about anything that has something to do with the brain benefits from the ketogenic diet. And the reason why I'm thinking this is because if you look at the fetus and you look at the mother who's pregnant, the fetus is in ketosis. The fetus does have insulin, it can handle glucose, but its brain is only using ketosis at that point, because everything that can cross the blood-brain barrier at that point is, of course, there's some glucose that can cross it, but it's not able yet to burn the glucose. It needs to have the fat. It needs to be able to create the brain. So some fatty acids go through and some other kind of acids go through that can then start build up, and protein, of course, that can start building up the brain. But carbohydrates per se, not essential whatsoever for this function. And so if you look at the milk that the infant gets from the mother, it has carbohydrates. Actually, it has a little bit higher carbohydrates than other form of milks relative to what it contains, but it's high in protein and it's high in fat as well. And once the fetus is born, the fetus is in ketosis in the womb all the way through. The fetus is born in ketosis, and the fetus remains in ketosis all through age 10 based on studies, but in my finding longer. And what happens is that when they nurse, then for a short period of time from nursing, they come out of ketosis, a very short time, usually 15, 20 minutes, and then they're right back into ketosis. And all their growth and healing is happening during the ketogenic state, which is fantastic if you consider it's a very interesting thing. And you also need to know that protein, for example, when we're talking about insulin is activating, and insulin is anabolic hormone and creating deposition of the protein into the right places, like growing of the bones and the muscles and so forth. Protein synthesis starts with a ketogenic amino acid, right? Leucine is ketogenic. So basically, we were meant to be in ketosis all the time, or if not all the time, at least at a period of times when we're not eating. And so I believe that the brain, the human brain, functions best in the state of ketosis, and it can repair the damages, whatever damages we have caused with it, in ketosis. And hence the high fat diet, very low carb, if any carbs whatsoever, and protein just enough to sustain and to create some protein synthesis time to time. But I recommend that if anybody who has a child who has autism, consider trying the ketogenic diet, and particularly contact even the Charlie Foundation. Even though they specialize in seizures and epilepsy, they may have some dietitians who they can recommend specifically for autism. It could be. Now, in terms of dairy, and dairy causing inflammation, dairy doesn't cause inflammation. If it did, then all of our children would be dead, right, from inflammation. So dairy isn't the problem product. Dairy is something that we all, every single one of us, started our lives with. So it cannot become inflammatory out of the blue at one point for no reason. It just doesn't happen. But what happens is that the milk changed. It's not that we changed toward the dairy, but that the dairy changed toward us. The ancestrally grown cows, they will milk when they milk. They aren't in the milking production day and night, 24/7, every single day of their lives. But today, with the population growth and with everybody wanting milk, we basically created cows that mass produce milk. I've seen pictures and films, videos of cows that couldn't walk properly because they're, I don't even know what it's called where they hold the milk. Their teeth were like ginormous and their legs were like this. They could barely walk. And as they were walking, they were spraying milk out, literally. And so this is a stress. This is stress on the animal. It's a stress on everything. And so the milk itself changed. And so what we had ancestrally, that was the A2 milk protein. Under this pressure, there was a mutation to A1 protein. And A1 protein is what is inflammatory. And that can cause problems. And so this is one of the reasons why we recommend in this group that you look for A2 protein. Grunstein cows are all A2, and also most Jersey cows are A2. But also, if you buy milk, at least in the United States, on the milk carton, there's going to be a stamp whether it's A1, A2. It's usually going to say A1/A2, which means it's a combination of the two kind of milk proteins. Or you can get the kind of milk that is just A2. Those are more expensive. This is like the A2 brand. There are some local brands to me that are A2 that write on the bottle that they're A2 only. So look for A2 only. You might not be able to find the cheese and the sour cream and all the other products is A2 or the cream. But in milk, it is the most important because that is where you have the most protein. Because when you look at, for example, the cream or the butter, those have less protein. Cheese has a lot of protein as well, so it can cause problem to people who are sensitive to A1. Then in that case, if you can't find A2 milk anywhere and you're sensitive to milk as a result, try goat milk because goat is A2. In other words, the only mutated animal is the cow. And any other animal whose milk you can have, which would be the sheep, the goat. Some people can have also camel milk, whatever other milk. Those are all A2 only, and they're going to be safe to drink. I don't know what they taste like, but apparently camel's milk is the healthiest milk. It's the closest to human milk. I don't know, but this is what they say. I know it's very expensive. And so when we're talking about then the milk, it isn't that milk is causing the inflammation, but that if you already have inflammation, then all foods, including milk, is going to be a problem. And let me add to this is that people say, well, I have leaky gut or gut problem is called. It's basically a leaky gut, which means that the top layer of the gut, which I mentioned earlier, is destroyed, and therefore there are a lot of cracks now in that layer, and so whatever foods that you're eating can cross. But when we're talking about foods, they're no longer food by the time they reach the intestines and by the time they reach the colon. There's no milk in there. There's going to be a mixture, I think it's called chyme. It's a mixture of food when it leaves the stomach. It's mixed with acids and enzymes. And then when it gets to the duodenum, which is the first part of the upper intestines, straight out of the stomach, it gets sprayed also with buffers so that the pH basically increases to be more alkaline, to be 6.5 or so that from that point on, fermentation by bacteria is going to be possible because in the stomach, our stomach acid is pH 1.5. And so it's very acidic, too acidic for bacteria to survive, assuming you have a healthy stomach. And then so when it passes, it would kill all bacteria in the gut flora, and we don't want that. So it immediately increases in pH to 6.5 or so. And the intestinal pH all the way through is about 6.5, in some places 7. 7 is neutral. And so when the food reaches that point, it's no longer a food. It's at that point, it's already a mix of molecular and ionic mix. This chyme, you couldn't recognize it as food. If you ever threw up, then you know it's no longer food. And that was still in your stomach. It hasn't yet passed into your intestines. So in the intestines, already in the duodenum, not only are buffers sprayed on it, but also the bile comes into it. So the color at that point of the food is green because bile is green. So you will have green stuff going through your intestines. And so if you have leaky gut, this green chyme stuff can leak into places where it shouldn't. And that can then cause problems because, of course, food shouldn't get directly into the blood like this. It's not in a chyme form. It should be getting into the blood in the form of glucose, in the form of fat, in the form of protein. These are all in a molecular form. So you need to understand that the food that you eat doesn't stay food any past your stomach. It immediately changes into ions, which are negatively or positively charged elements, could be electrons or protons that are moving and bonding. This is why, for example, polyunsaturated fatty acid, the unsaturation means they have hydrogen open that can then be grabbed by an oxygen to create water, and that's oxidation. So everything changes, even fat changes. Everything is into hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, water, oxygen, and hydrogen. I mean, nothing stays in the shape that you ate it. So it's not going to be food that is getting into those areas, but some molecular elements may seep in there, which then may cause trouble either by creating growth of bacteria that shouldn't be growing in that place, or it's rotting, or it causes some other kind of problems. And so that's what we are talking about when we have an inflammation and a gut inflammation, a leaky gut. But it's not caused by milk because milk doesn't even get there, right? It's a chyme. It's not milk. It's not specific to what food you ate. It's like saying that diverticulitis is caused by nuts. The nuts are completely broken down into little tiny little fragments in the stomach. We can't digest fiber. We can't. But it's no longer going to be nuts. So it's not going to get through to your intestines as nuts. It's going to get through as chyme. There's one exception, and that's fiber, and I mentioned it earlier. So what actually causes gut inflammation are the fibers, because fibers we can't absorb whatsoever, the insoluble fibers. And grains, for example, in particular, also contain a kind of proteins we can absorb, and a lot of phytates we can absorb, and a lot of plants contain all these plant anti-nutrients that we can't absorb and we can't digest. And all of these are getting through the intestines and the colon indigested. Those are then the problem products. It isn't milk. Milk we absorb right away. Milk is not a problem. It's full of nutrients for us. Meat is not a problem. We fully absorb meat completely right away. Fish is not a problem. Fish we will absorb the fish fat we may have a problem with, but we will absorb the meat of the fish very fast. Plants that have fiber in them are major problems because we can't do anything with insoluble fibers. And not only do they cause major problems, they are the ones responsible for diverticulitis, the inflammatory processes. They also cause constipation. And so basically all of these things that we're looking at together then cause what is then called the autoimmune diseases, right? And so this is the last part of your question, because you're asking that if all these inflammatory processes, like for example with milk, is the inflammation associated with autoimmune response. And yes, it is 100% autoimmune response, because what happens is when you eat foods that you can't digest, your immune system says, aha, there's an alien. I have to get rid of that alien. And that then is going to start attacking the very thing that you can't digest. And so that's going to be a problem. Also in your blood, people sometimes have inflamed vascular systems. So why do we have that? And I have to mention that under this particular question because it's relevant. If you have a lot of sugar in your diet and your blood can't do anything with that glucose because it's just simply too high, and the sodium channels can't take it out, and insulin, your body is insulin resistant and you can't take out, and your blood glucose is now 200, 300, 400. It can go upwards of like 2,000 or 3,000, something like that. I know we're looking at blood glucose that is just 99 as our maximum, but a lot of people out there who have it over 500. So when you're talking about those people, glucose, as I noted earlier, kills the top layer of the vascular wall, and it's going to glycocalyx, and it's going to then go through the endothelium and create cracks, create damage, plaque formation. Now we're talking about inflammation. And then this person will also be then starting to eat a lot of plants with a lot of calcium in them. So, for example, think of spinach. A lot of people eat spinach because it's full of calcium and it's also full of iron. But it's plant iron, not human iron, not animal iron. And plant calcium, it's a different calcium from the calcium that you would find elsewhere. And so what's going to happen? We can't really use that iron. In order to use that iron, we're going to use a lot of other nutrients from our body, including calcium. And so we're going to lose both iron and both calcium from our body. But in our blood, we're going to have a calcium buildup. So I see a lot of people, not necessarily in the group, but private clients, who are eating a lot of vegetarian diet, a lot of spinach, absolutely adore them, and their blood calcium level is sky high. And that's not good. That's an inflammatory response. Now you have a much thicker blood than what you should have. It's full of calcium. It's unhealthy. Okay? And so you can see that autoimmune diseases can come from many ways, but whatever causes the autoimmune disease, it will then reflect everything else. So, for example, we have new members coming into the group saying, oh, I can't eat eggs, I can't have milk, I can't have this food, that food, because I have a bad reaction to it. And we have to tell them, no, you don't have bad reaction to milk and eggs and other foods. You need to stop the grain in your diet, and you need to stop the vegetable oils in your diet, and you need to stop those plants in your diet, because those are the ones that create the kind of inflammatory responses, because of which then you can't eat the eggs. Let me, for example, give you an example. I used to have, prior to the protocol, an extremely bad peanut allergy. I would just eat one peanut and I would just start choking, not able to breathe. And once I even called the ambulance and they took me into the hospital and I got some Benadryl and whatever else to get me to breathe properly. So it was sort of kind of anaphylactic kind of a reaction, not fully because I wasn't starting to swell completely and I didn't faint. When I stopped eating, and that was for years, by the way, and also same for olives. And then for years, I didn't have any as a result because I was very concerned. And when we started the protocol, I didn't even think of having any. And like 3 to 4 years into, maybe 5 years into the protocol, I no longer remember the exact time now, when I know I haven't had grains for like 4 or 5 years, I haven't had seed oils for even longer, haven't had any sugars, any vegetables that were bad for me for a long time. I decided to try peanuts. So I took a little bag of peanuts and went to my doctor's office in the emergency room, and I just told one of the nurses in the emergency waiting that I'm just going to be here eating peanuts. This was before COVID, and I could still do that. I couldn't do that now. I went to have my, I just sat down. I said, okay, I'm just going to have this bag of peanuts. Just keep an eye on me because I have a peanut allergy, and I just want to see if I can eat peanuts now. I ate the whole bag, no problem. I came home, ate some olives, no problem. All my allergy disappeared. What happened to my allergy? I never was allergic to peanuts or olives. I was allergic to grains and these plants. And this was a very good reminder. This past weekend, we went out for dinner, not this week, but the one before. Went out for dinner to a restaurant and I ordered oysters, and they have these cocktail sauces. And so I dipped my first oyster into the cocktail sauce and had a huge, nearly dying attack for my asthma, which by the way also disappeared, and I am not on any asthma medication now for a long time. I said, what the hell? And I took another bite, and nearly I was reaching for my EpiPen. It was just that bad. Luckily it went away, but I realized they must have put some grain into the sauce and nobody told me. I asked for a completely grain-free meal. Nobody expects an oyster cocktail sauce to have grain in it, but there must have been some grain in it. And I had a major reaction to it. And so it's the grain. And as I say, it's a grain dummy. It's not the milk or the egg or the peanuts. So look for that. So the next question is from Sergey Martin. He says, I think it's a he, I'm not sure. I'm interested in food intolerance. I've done a simple test twice, and both showed I'm intolerant to dairy, very specifically to kind of elements, in addition to some foods, but I've never had any digestive issues after consuming dairy. My question is, how harmful may the food intolerance to my body be, and can it trigger a migraine? So I just explained that food intolerances are all the result of grain. But I also want to explain that when you do a blood test for a food intolerance, it will always show some sort of immune response, and that's because food is not you. So taking a blood intolerance test for food is absolutely useless. It will always show that you have an allergy, because it's not you, and it's the job of your immune system is to create very specific antigens for very specific things that you're eating, to always check if there's anything happening with that particular food. And so this is more so with certain foods such as milk. And the reason why there is because the milk itself, think back of the mother's milk. What does the mother's milk contain? It's very well known that the mother's milk contains bacteria, and it contains also her immune cells. And what these do is that these two help the baby develop its own immune system based on the mother's immune system, and to develop its gut flora. By now we know that the baby will have very specific gut flora to whatever flora is in the milk. Cows are no different. Cow milk is for the cow baby, right? It's for the little calf to have its immune system get ready. And so it will be full of bacteria, and it will be full of immune system and white cells. So of course our immune system is going to respond to milk. But the question is, what is the immune system going to do after that? And if you're a human and if your body is used to milk, it will do nothing. So it's not inflammatory, and that's why you don't have an inflammatory response. That's why you're completely fine with the food that you're eating. And this is why I don't ever recommend for anyone to go and get a blood allergy test. It's quite useless. You will always show immune response to those foods that are typically full of stuff to be allergic to. There's a question from Chrissy Dasher about hyperhidrosis, because her husband recently just developed out of the blue some hyperhidrosis, which is excessive sweating. And the question is this a result of reducing carbs, more protein, or hormones starting changing, or all? Should he move to salting water? Will this help? And my answer is that hyperhidrosis is maybe completely idiopathic, meaning independent of anything else, and secondary to other diseases, which may be metabolic disorder. And there are some other disorders that it may be secondary to. So I would recommend him to actually go to a doctor and have some tests to see if there's any reason for it, because it's such a sudden adult onset. It usually isn't an adult onset, unless of course you're a woman and you have hot flashes, which is not really hyperhidrosis. But for a man, this is not normal. I would like him to have a pure medical test saying that this is something new. Linda Thomason is asking, she suffers from hemiplegic migraine, and she says that, of course, there are a lot of literature out there with association of stroke and hemiplegic migraine. And her mother also has aura migraine, and she had a stroke and got paralyzed. So that kind of stroke is what's referred to as a vet stroke rather than a TIA. And so her question is, what are her chances basically of getting a stroke as a result of being a hemiplegic migraineur? And what are the smart things that she can ask her neurologist? So first of all migraines mean that we have an issue in the brain, and therefore we are more likely to get a stroke just simply by being a migraineur, provided that we continue having migraines. So the whole idea in the protocol is to prevent having a migraine. So it really doesn't matter what kind of migraineur you are. If you prevent having migraines, you have a normal life. Then you aren't at an increased risk for the stroke. You're at increased risk as long as you're out of balance all the time, and particularly at increased risk if you continue taking medications. Most of the medications that we can get today are very bad, very unhealthy, cause serious problems, including triptans. And triptans are terrible for the heart as well. It can cause serious heart problems, thyroid problems, all kinds of other problems. And so In terms of stroke health, or preventing the stroke, uh, and be healthy, and what to ask a neurologist. So for stroke health, I recommend that you start either the low carb protocol diet or the carnivore diet, which is even better. And in time, you move over to ketogenic if you'd like. But to prevent the stroke, you need to stop eating all the bad foods. You need to stop eating grains, stop eating all sweeteners, not just sugar, but all sweeteners, honey, everything, and even the fake ones, because they raise insulin, and your stroke risk increases with insulin increase. So you need to look at it that way. In terms of what to ask the neurologist, I wouldn't go to a neurologist, to be honest, because there's nothing they can do other than prescribe medications. And I just explained that medications are a lot unhealthier than changing your diet to be healthy. So to prevent the migraines, you prevent the stroke. Eat properly, eat the real human food, which is what we offer in the protocol. Nilofer Crayonides is asking, Angela, my question involves the genes which migraineurs lack to tolerate carbohydrates. Were these carbohydrate tolerating genes lost because they were not necessary given a good sustained hunting environment where carbs were not needed, or was the ability to tolerate carbs never gained by our genetic group to begin with, i.e., the original human genotype didn't contain carbohydrate tolerating genes? Bingo. This last sentence is the truth. I explained this in the book, and I'm going to explain it more in the new book that is going to come out. And I'm still dying to get that discussion that I had with Dr. Sivas, because I actually discuss the genetics a little bit there. If he leaves it in, we'll see how much he's going to cut out. All humans were born without the carbohydrate tolerating genes. By this I mean is that humans in the evolutionary process starting about 2 million years ago stopped eating carbohydrates. Humans became scavengers and then started to hunt, and then hunting became the primary way of survival. So carbohydrates, and even when when they were hunting gatherers and they gathered instead of hunted, the foods that they gathered were very fibrous. There was no carbohydrate in them, not much. And many tribes even today live eating that way. And so when you don't eat carbohydrates, your ionic channels don't need to function the way that they need to function when you eat carbohydrates. It's a different kind of a response by the brain. So our brain is very different. And I consider the migraine brain to be the ancient ancestral human brain, because even the hypersensory organs, which we have more sensory organ neuronal connections in our brain, and so we have, for example, looking at the same light as a non-migrainer will do, I will get more light sensory information than a non-migrainer does from the exact same light, simply because I have more connections associated with light sensing in my brain. But this was the normal brain. If you go to any kind of a national park and you see wild animals, what do? They constantly look, their ears are turning and rotating. They're all hypersensory. That was a norm. You had predators. For humans, the ability to not have to worry about predators, that was a privilege. And at that time, the genes modified to reduce the ability because we no longer needed them. So for us, migraineurs, we didn't change. We are the original ones. The ones who adapted are the ones who today can eat carbohydrates. Those are the adapted humans. So we haven't lost anything. We are exactly the same we were 2 million years ago in terms of our brain sensitivity and sensory organs. What changed is the rest of the humans who have adapted to be able to eat more carbohydrates. Then Andrea Barnes asked about neuropathy. And so neuropathy is a consequence of a damage to a nerve. And very specifically, there are many kinds of neuropathies, but very specifically type 2 diabetes comes with neuropathy. So if you have neuropathy such as burning of the sole of the feet, then you have the kind of neuropathy that is associated with type 2 diabetes. There are other kind of neuropathies. There could be tingles and soreness, loss of nerve sense, whatever, it's a pinched nerve associated. And so neuropathy isn't specific to migraine. We don't have neuropathy any more than other people do. But because we're more sensitive to having type 2 diabetes, we will be more sensitive to having neuropathy in our feet, for example. I had neuropathy for the past 40 years or 35 years in my feet. I had no idea what it was until it disappeared. And it disappeared on this diet. Now I no longer have neuropathy. It took many years, but it disappeared. Now, Anne Brennan is asking questions about lipedema and lymphedema. So lipedema and lymphedema, both of these are uh, different kind of genes. It's a genetic disorder where the lymphatic system and the lipid system communicate in a weird way, such that the lymphatic system is basically all the white blood cells. So you get the lymph nodes, for example, if it swells and you have a viral infection or a bacterial infection, that's because you're starting to manufacture more white blood cells to get rid of your infection. And so some people have a difficulty emptying or releasing the dyed white blood cells and replace what's called the lymphatic fluid system. And the lipedema are people who are unable to handle lipid properly as a result of having some problems with the lymphatic system as well. And so they will start growing fat deposits in certain parts of their body. It's very specific to women. It's not yet understood why. But and it typically starts in the legs, though there are in time also the arms going to become very big, and there are some other deformities, and in time the whole body will become very big, but they're not fat per se. It's a deposition of fatty tissue under the skin, so it's not like around the organs, which would be the one that makes people fat. They don't have the fat around the organ. They have it under the skin. It's in a different place where a fat person would have it. And so everybody thinks that they're fat, but they're not fat. It's not a fatty problem. It is a problem of how the body responds to the fat. This is a very interesting problem, and if you're listening to this, I recommend you look at Siobhan Huggins, who also has lipedema, and she went on a nearly amazing amount of fat. I mean, I was watching her the other day. She was eating something like I think 6 eggs or 13 eggs, I forget now how many, mixed with pure butter. I mean, there was but more butter than eggs, and so that was her meal. And what she discovered was is that eating a very high fat meal, and the eggs, of course, also full of fat, and it was limited amount of protein. There was some protein on the side, but so she only eats animal products, and it was mostly fat. She found that this actually helped her reverse. I don't know if it reversed or put to remission or just simply starting to move away. I don't know what stage she's in, but she's about as thin now as I have ever seen. And that's primarily because she's eating an extremely high fat diet. So there's a chance there, but I don't know more about it. So you'd want to get in touch with her and find out what she's doing that is helping her so much. Then Andrea Cass is asking, one of our admins, to ask that if, because my book is delayed, and of course in the book we always say that the most important things to read are basically in the group and not in the book, but we still recommend the book. And so she wanted me to elaborate on that a little bit. So the old book is very much still needed. Hold on. Because what the book does is it explains what migraine is. It doesn't give any advice on food, or minimal, if it does any. And of course, in the group is where we have the protocol. So the book doesn't have the protocol in the same way that we have in the group. But if you want to know what to do if you suddenly get a migraine, there's an introductory section right there, like 3 to 4 pages, that tells you what to do step by step. If you have this, do this. If you have this, do this. And also it explains migraine in a section that is easily understandable. So if you want to understand migraine, you need to read the book, because that is where I explain it. In the new book, I will explain what migraine is a little bit harder. It's going to be a little bit more scientific, so it's going to be a bit more difficult. And I will try to put as much of the protocol into the book as possible, but it will never be possible to create a book that has everything in it because that would be a book well over 1,000 pages, and there's just no way for me to publish that. I'm limited in page counts to, I believe, 700 pages max, and so I need to be as trim as possible. And in my mind, it is more important for people to understand what migraine is and how to prevent it than what to have for breakfast, which they can sort of kind of figure out once they understood what migraine was. And also we provide information on that in the group. And so the book is useful, and the new book, I don't know when it's going to appear because I have lots of interviews and lots of things scheduled, but I'm working on it every day. It's just a little bit every day, and it's very complicated, very complex. I'm trying to simplify it, so do read the old book until then. It's completely relevant. There's nothing in it other than we removed orange juice from using for hydration. When you're vomiting, we replace it with coconut water, and we don't drink milk at night anymore. We instead have meat, 50 gram of meat before bedtime. But basically everything else is the same. So everything else is explained in the book. Charlie Kuntz is asking, he's only been following the group for a couple of weeks. And is there already atherosclerosis? If there's already atherosclerosis, which is caused by inflammation, is that reversible with this diet? And if it is irreversible, would you advise to eat less than 60% fat? So here's my answer. First of all, whether it's reversible or not reversible, if there's just atherosclerosis, there are two kinds. There's just atherosclerotic plaques, which are made basically of dead cells of blood and white blood cells, and also some cholesterol and fat and some other tissues. That is completely reversible. If there's calcification on top of it, that means it's a bigger atherosclerosis that some people have shown to be reversible, but or at least to be reducible. There are no studies on this. It's brand new because the diet process is brand new. But some people have been following this through Ivor Cummins' work. They've been following a handful of people for the past, I don't know how many years, maybe 2 years. And they have shown improvement on their calcium artery calcification score, the CAC score. And improvement on that score means that even the calcified atherosclerosis is reduced. Whether it's reversible fully, we don't know yet. But if it's just atherosclerosis, it's completely reversible. In terms of if not reversible, so assume for a second that it's not reversible. Your question is whether you should eat less fat. Why would you eat less fat? Atherosclerosis is not caused by fat. So it's caused by carbohydrates, fiber in particular, lots of sugar. That's like the prime problem. Lots of sugar. Sugar is bad for the blood, causes inflammation. There is a cause for atherosclerosis. It's 90%. I bet you 90% of atherosclerosis is caused by eating sugar and other kind of carbohydrates that simply cause way too much glucose in the blood that is not possible to take out, and also calcium that is being in the blood as a result of eating lots of vegetables where the calcium is inabsorbable. Another cause of atherosclerosis may be, for example, high homocysteine, and high homocysteine is caused by B12 and B9 and B6 irregularities. So it is important that you have a blood tested and to see if your homocysteine is higher than 6 to 7 is the ideal range. If it is higher than 7, it's an atherosclerotic danger. If it is lower than 6, it is a danger because it means that you don't have enough antioxidants, because homocysteine can also be used as an antioxidant. But fat, nothing to do with fat. We don't actually have fat or cholesterol in our blood. They travel in LDL, HDL in the blood, and that's not fat. Those are protein balls, lipid and protein balls in which cholesterol travels. And in LDL, in addition to being cholesterol in LDL, there's also your vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin K2. These are all anti-inflammatory and terribly helpful, and they're in your LDL. So if your LDL is too low, you have a problem with inflammation. If it's too high, you have no problems. That means you have plenty of vitamin A, E, and K2. And D3 also has to travel, of course, in the blood which is fat soluble. So we're talking about that fat itself is never a problem for the human body at all. We are basically every single cell made of fat. So we need fat and we need cholesterol. Your brain is fat and cholesterol. You need that. Now, Chrissy Dasher had a great question about leptin resistance. So, do I care about leptin resistance? Is it real? And so, how do people heal or do from it? So, first of all, I have tremendously strong leptin resistance, and I've been watching it and checking it every now and then. But the funny thing is that leptin controls satiety. I always thought that the higher your leptin was, the worse it gets, because then obviously then you would be more hungry, right? But actually, when your leptin is very high and you have leptin resistance, you're never hungry. So guess what? You can fast. It's superb to have leptin resistance, and it doesn't affect anything. My husband is thin as my finger. He's hungry all day long. He's eating continuously, and his leptin is lower than normal. So who's better off, the one who has lower leptin or the one who has higher leptin? I believe that the one who has higher leptin, who has leptin resistance, is better off, because we can fast until the cows come home and we're fine and we're not hungry. As our hunger starts increasing over time, our leptin resistance disappears, then that tells you that your leptin is no longer resistant and you're doing better, but then you're going to be hungrier. So it's sort of kind of a trade-off, but it doesn't have the kind of negative effect, at least so far as we know of, like insulin resistance or anything else. It really doesn't affect anything other than how hungry you feel. And the more resistant you are, the less hungry you will feel. It's great. I haven't had anything to eat yet today. It's 1:17 and I'm doing great and don't feel hungry. That's what leptin resistance does. So I would ask you just to ignore. It's meaningless. Liz Newman asked me, what should people do with high blood pressure and salt intake? And what should be done for a non-migrainer with high blood pressure who has a Charlie horse? So Charlie horse is a very bad cramp. So the first question is, of course, is what should people with high blood pressure do with salt intake? Well, salt doesn't increase blood pressure, so take salt. The question is, what else is taking that is increasing their blood pressure? They need to stop taking those things or eating those things that cause high blood pressure to start with. They need to hydrate properly, and they need to increase their salt intake, because without, our blood is very salty. I did a calculation not too long ago. In a cup of blood, we have more sodium than what the USDA daily allowance is. You have that much sodium in the blood. You have to replenish that sodium, because if you don't, the kidneys recycle the sodium, and that is going to cause a lot of problems. So salt is not going to increase blood pressure, provided the kidneys can recycle sodium. So if somebody has kidney failure, that's a different story. Kidney health will improve as long as it's possible to still improve it by increasing salt, because the reason why kidneys fail is because they have to recycle sodium all the time and they have to dump glucose all the time, and that's not their functions. So you need to increase the salt. Now, in terms of a non-migrainer and a Charlie horse is a cramp. We know cramp is caused by not enough salt. So anybody who has a cramp should take salt. It's simple as that. Salt on its own is what I take when I get a cramp, which lately I don't really get. Jan Hill Jordan is asking, I've read that the keto diet is not recommended for people who get kidney stones. Can you elaborate on that? I said, yep, I can. So, kidney stones are not caused by any particular diet. Kidney stones are a combination of calcium and oxalate. So if you have a kind of diet that is high in oxalate and you're not drinking enough water, and you have a kind of body that isn't able to successfully excrete the excess oxalates and also the calcium that goes with it, then you're going to end up with kidney stones. It's partly genetic, whether you can excrete oxalates and calcium or not, and it's partly also of what you eat. Ketogenic diet is known to contain a lot of spinach, a lot of almonds, particularly people who eat a lot of like almond bread, almond cookies, almond this, almond that, full of oxalates. I'm not in support of any kind of a almond this, almond that for that reason. Also don't support a lot of vegetables, because vegetables are full of oxalates. Plants don't want to be eaten. Oxalate is an anti-nutrient, right? Sorry, my voice is starting to fade a little bit. And so the keto diet doesn't cause kidney stones if you're taking a medication such as Topamax or Topiramata in brand and generic, the combination is more likely to cause kidney stones. And that's because of the medication. And so if you're not on the medication, your kidney stone is, I mean, the keto diet is completely fine. This is one reason why people who join our keto group, one of our questions is, are you on any medication? Because if you are, and if it's a kind of medication that is known or is potentially interacting with the ketogenic diet, we will tell you not to join that group because you're going to end up more likely than not with a kidney stone. But otherwise, there's no connection. To avoid kidney stones, you need to increase water in your diet, you need to increase salt in your diet, because these two are going to increase the clearance of whatever is in your kidneys so your kidney can clear, and then you're not going to have kidney stones. Okay? And this one was by Jacob. Jacob is asking about addiction to milk products. There are some people who can addicted to anything, and there are some people who can't get addicted to anything whatsoever. So I'm a person who doesn't get addicted to anything. I used to smoke cigarettes, 3 packs a day for 20 years, and one day just said, cold turkey, I quit, never needed it. Other people go through patches, do all kinds of stuff, and they're still smoking 10 years later. So there are different people. For some people, they have a very, what I would refer to as addictive personality. It's not a choice, it's how you were born. And then there are the people who are not addictive personalities at all. And so if you have an addictive personality and you feel that you can't stand still until there's a little bit of milk or a little bit of cream or cheese in your fridge, but you keep on going at it and you keep on eating it until it's there, then you have an addictive personality and you're addicted to dairy. It is not a choice. You either have it or you don't have it. You can't change it. It isn't something you can just, okay, there's that milk and I'm really addicted, but I can't go for it. It's a very hard thing to do. I'm sure it's possible to do because those who have who are addicted to alcohol or drugs can in time come off, but it's a medical process. It's not just like I quit. And so it depends on who you are and depends on how well you can tolerate to do something against your wishes, so to speak. So it's not even an inner strength. I wouldn't even call that. It's just simply your body, who you are, based on genetics, not in psychological means. Christy Beverly was asking if how is it beneficial to drink milk at night because of the milk sugars interact with our brain cells while we sleep. And of course we know we don't actually support milk at night anymore, and nothing to do with how they interact with our brain, but rather it isn't enough protein to eat, and it's too much carbohydrate, so we don't support it anymore. Otherwise, milk does have some chemicals, not the sugars, but some other chemicals that do tend to put people to sleep. This is why babies get a bottle of milk at night before they fall asleep, which is not a very good thing because then the sugar is all over the teeth and they get problems. But before they get teeth, it does have some chemicals in them, not the sugar, that will make them sleep. We're almost at the end, so we have 2 more questions. So Kelly Lisa was asking about migraineurs who only get migraine a couple of times a year and not more, and should they still change to our way of living and should they change diet? And my answer is yes, because we all started with only 1 or 2 a year, right? And then it sort of kind of creeped up and increased to the point where we could no longer control it. So they're lucky that they still only get 1 or 2, but maybe 10 years from now it's going to be 1 or 2 a week, and maybe 10 years later it's going to be 1 or 2 a day. So yes, they should. It's a sign. They're migraineurs, they need to change because their body is going to suffer, even if not with migraine necessarily. They will definitely suffer much more in terms of diabetes. So it's not just the migraine, but it's also metabolic health, right? It's a whole body health and cancer and all the associated conditions. And the last question is by Emily Nadeau. And she's asking about the bioidentical hormones. And she says that she now feels as though she had more migraines around her periods. And bioidentical just means that they're identical biologically, meaning molecular and atomic terms, they're completely identical to the real thing. And so in every which way, they should work the same way as the real thing. And so, if that is true, and that's something that you'd have to discuss with your doctor, how much bioavailable really truly means. It's fully bioavailable. As a chemist, I would say they're completely bioavailable, and I take a bioavailable hormone that is synthetic. I'm taking the synthetic version of estrogen. I no longer have uterus or ovaries, so I'm just taking estrogen. Even though I'm almost 69, I still need it. And but hormones don't increase migraines. What hormones do is, as during the month, as you change from one hormonal cycle to the next hormonal cycle, you will have an increase in sodium and some other times the potassium naturally, because of the way your brain is going to work and utilize those hormones in a different way. Your brain has to instruct your body to now empty the uterus, now keep the uterus's lining, blah, blah. So you're going to have a lot of different monthly variation as a result of the hormones. Now, if you take a hormone regularly every month, say it's a progesterone, is I think what you wrote that you're taking, it's not cyclical. You're taking it every single day. So it shouldn't affect it. But what may affect in taking progesterone only is that that is a steroid hormone. And, and as such, it will have negative consequences if that is taken on its own and alone. I don't know if you still have any of your organs in, but normally women who have all their organs in, they need to take both estrogen and progesterone. Taking only one or two, one or the other, is going to lead to trouble. And so maybe your body is just telling you that you should stop using just the progesterone on its own, and maybe you need estrogen as well, or maybe you don't need any steroid hormones whatsoever. And so with that, then I have come to the end of the video, and now I just need to figure out how to actually close it, because it doesn't tell me how to. So bye everybody, and I hope to see you in the group with more questions. Thank you.